and there is reason for concern. We need to be concerned that the AIDS epidemic is far from being over. We need to be concerned that prejudice, stigma, and discrimination still affront the dignity and humanity of millions of people worldwide.
Where silence reigns, trauma thrives, and this is certainly true when we're talking about HIV today. Because we stopped talking for decades about HIV, because we didn't educate a generation, the legacy of the AIDS crisis is still dumped on those who are just recently diagnosed with HIV today. But how we overcome this is through the power of the personalised story. By platforming our voices, we get to change hearts and minds. We get to educate a nation. We get to show the humanity behind all the amazing people living with HIV. But we need to invest in people living with HIV to get those leaders that we need. I will always be grateful to Father Michael Kelly for reminding me to remain humble, to be compassionate to all those around me, and just to see the humanity in all those around me.
The one thing I learned from Father Michael is to live a stigma-less life. Live and love a positive life, because this is who I am. I am not going to change. I am living a positive life. The other way is to also support the other young people living with HIV to overcome stigma. And this can only be done if I come together with other advocates to advocate against stigma among people living with HIV. And this will help us to keep Father Michael's legacy of ending stigma among people living with HIV in our communities and in the world.
I think HIV stigma is still an issue for people living with HIV, as the widespread information dissemination about treatment outcomes are still lacking. There is something that we can do about this. Bring your valuable knowledge into conversations and spaces wherever possible where you think people may not be in the know. Perhaps you could put them in touch with the wonderful podcast Pause Vibes, because if there's one thing I've learned from Professor Father Michael Kelly himself, is that we all have an obligation to ensure that HIV stigma is no longer a part of the experience for people living with HIV.
Stigma remains one of the biggest barriers to living positively with HIV. It comes in many forms and it exists in every country that I've ever lived or worked in. When I first had a conversation with Father Michael about stigma, he was really clear. No one should be stigmatized because of their HIV status. It saddened him greatly to know that people living with HIV were being stigmatized in the healthcare system, in their communities, and even in their families. We also discussed self-stigma and the reality that it's possible to live with HIV, but for many, it's not possible to live with the self-stigma and shame. Self-stigma eats away at a person, making them think that they're less than, that they're not worthy of love or life-saving medication, or in some cases of actually living. Father Michael was clear: stigma and self-stigma kill, and that we can do something about it. We can do something about it by speaking out, by supporting people living with HIV however we can. And for self-stigma, we can invest in programs that tackle deep-rooted self-judgments and belief that support a person to move from self-stigma to self-worth. We can understand that all of us have a role to play in stopping the stigma, and that it starts by not stigmatizing ourselves. Michael was an incredible friend and mentor. And when I think of him, I think of dignity, I think of humility, of empathy, of evidence, of equity, and women's vulnerability and power. But most of all, I think of love. Something Michael taught me is to be part of the movement to spread love and solidarity, and not stigma and fear.
There is still so much stigma towards people living with HIV and towards HIV, because people still treat HIV as this unspoken subject that no one should be speaking about, and we should just be sweeping it under the carpet. I think that the reason there's still so much stigma has to do with our own denial with regards to how HIV is and how people living with HIV are supposed to live like. And what I've learned from Father Michael Kelly about HIV and HIV stigma is that there's no reason There's no reason for us to stigmatize people for living with HIV. We have to come together, love each other, and accept that HIV is here. There are people who are living with HIV, and we should just come together, love each other, and just unite. And that is how we will win this fight against HIV.
Stigma has been with us forever, and it will continue to be with us for a very long time. However, HIV-related stigma does not have to be. If we learn to accept, think through our own prejudices, and learn to understand people for who and what they are. Father Michael Kelly espoused all those values and principles.
HIV-related stigma is still an issue because there is ignorance. There is a lot of ignorance about HIV, there's a lack of information. People don't know how you contract HIV, or misinformation. There's also prejudice towards people who are living with HIV. Father Michael was an extremely compassionate person. He came across as quite non-judgmental. And I think that a society where we can listen to one another and engage in dialogue and not judge and have care and compassion for one another. That's what I'm taking from Father Michael.
Father Kelly's work underscored our collective duty to help people achieve healthy lives, regardless of their HIV status or their life circumstances. HIV-related stigma prevents people from accessing health facilities for HIV testing, care, treatment, and certainly for prevention. Father Kelly also worked tirelessly to reduce gender inequities, reduce gender-based discrimination and gender-based violence, and to help everyone have an equal footing.
One of the most important things I have learned about stigma from our dearest Father Michael is about the participation of women. As many of you know, Michael was a true feminist, an advocate for the rights of women and girls. He saw stigma and discrimination as a social epidemic that grinds people down in shame, isolation and rejection. In his first lecture in 2006, Michael said, and I quote, that we will never be successful in responding to the AIDS epidemic until we take robust, sustained and specific action to reduce and ultimately eliminate the prejudice, discrimination and unjust treatment that women experience. Without a frontal attack on the injustice of gender inequality, the dominance of the epidemic will continue and the spectre of stigma will remain. Every step that is taken to raise the status of women and to recognise their equal status with men is a step against the epidemic and a step against stigma. He went on to say that if we want to see an end to stigma and discrimination, we need to involve the participation of women. We need to cut out the exploitation of women. We need to reject attitudes and practices that offend against the dignity of women. And above all, we need to listen courageously and carefully to the experience of women and hear what they are saying about this epidemic and the stigma that goes with it. In gratitude for all that Michael taught me over many years of deep friendship, his memory lives on in his kindness, his powerful words and his enduring spirit.
Thank you for all your teachings. Thank you for teaching us that we shouldn't be pointing fingers, we shouldn't stigmatize others, but we should be very empathetic. With that said, I want to say, I'm an inspiration, bringing education on gender equalization. So much sensation, feel that vibration, singing peace to the nation. I bring life to this earth, recognize my worth. Gobamina Gili Kawe. Tomorrow is for my children, the future we can change, the world we will rearrange. I am courage, passion, efficiency. I'm a woman well organized man. I'm so different, but equal, with a meticulous plan. Let me show you who I am. I'm a woman.